Hey Matrix, welcome to the next part of the reproductive structures of females. Okay, well, I have put a very detailed version of the female reproductive organ in front of you. This is one that you don't need to learn. I just want you to see the more 3D structure before we get into the more simplistic stuff, and until I show you what is actually expected of you to learn and or draw. So we're going to start, let's say, at the right ovary. Okay, so there's a white structure at the top right hand corner. You can see that it is attached by an ovarian ligament. This is so that your ovary doesn't float around in your body, and there's actually some sort of attachment. Then you'll see that those finger-like structures. If you go to the left hand side, you'll see an ovary dissected in half, or cross section of an ovary, and on the fingers are something called the fimbriae. The fimbriae are attached to the infundibulum, and then that is known as the entire fallopian tube, going all the way into that more pear-like structure, and that pear-like structure is known as your uterus. Please note that there, underneath the cross-section ovary, is a word called myometrium. So those are the very muscular walls of the uterus, and they need to be extremely muscular like that so that they can actually stretch and allow for the baby to be pushed out when contractions start happening. Something else to mention, it's not in here itself, I'll show you a little bit later, but we're going to talk about the endometrium a little bit later. But that is the nutritious blood layer that forms on top of the myometrium, and you can see that there's blood vessels directly to the right and left hand side of the myometrium, supplying the entire uterus with a lot of blood and nutrients. As you go down the uterus, you'll see that there is the cervix. Okay, there's a label line right at the bottom left hand corner, and finally you have the vaginal canal right at the base there. All right, so this is maybe slightly easier for you to look at, maybe just a couple more things. So here we'll go from the bottom up. So you'll see the vaginal canal over there. It is simply just a canal for the entry of the penis to allow for copulation to occur. Then you've got the cervix over there. It is an extremely strong muscle. It is a sphincter, so it's round muscle. It works much like your anus, so it's able to contract and relax, and that's also what helps push the child out. Then we have the uterus. The uterus is where the child develops inside. On the right and left hand side, you see those white things, those are your ovaries. On the left hand side, you can see the fimbriae connected to the infundibulum. That whole thing itself is the fallopian tube, and that is actually where fertilization takes place. And you can see on the right hand side over there in the ovary, it has developing follicles. And it says a newly discharged ovum or egg. So it actually is it moves directly in through the fimbriae into the infundibulum, and that is where it sits. It is also lined with ciliated columna, so that the egg can be moved from the fimbriae into the fallopian tube for fertilization to occur. And once fertilization has occurred, it's then going to move into the myometrium and embed itself in the endometrium, but we'll do that a little bit later. All right, please will you draw this? This is super, it's the easiest one I could find on the internet because I can't draw it for you myself. So again, all the bits and pieces are there. I'm trying to see if there's anything missing. Oh, okay. Please will you also label, so it's labeled the uterus. Please also label the muscular wall on the inside, the myometrium. Remember the word myo means muscle. And then the inner layer over there, please label as the endometrium. Okay, please make sure that you make note of the ovarian ligament so that you can prove to yourself that this doesn't float in your system, and that is about it. Alright, so let's look at an annotated version of this. I'm going to start at the bottom right hand corner, and we're going to work our way anti-clockwise. So we've got the vaginal, which is the canal in which a sperm is deposited during copulation and through which the baby is delivered. Okay, and I know like this might sound embarrassing now, but you really do need to know all these annotations and these definitions. Then we have the uterus, which is a muscular structure which protects and allows for the development of the fetus. Okay, and remember implantation is going to occur in the word over there, endometrium. Then we have a ligament which holds the ovary in position. We have a ciliated funnel called the infundibulum, and this traps the ovum, and the end of the fimbriae. We then have cilia, Ciliary movements assist in moving ovum towards the uterus. This is only once fertilization has occurred, though. Hey, it does move towards that way, but it's more so that once fertilization has occurred, we can implant the egg into the endometrium. Then we have the fallopian tube in the top left-hand top left-hand side, also known as the oviduct, and some examiners actually use the word oviduct. So please make sure you know fallopian tube is the same as an oviduct. And this transfers the ovum to the uterus and the location where fertilization usually takes place. They love asking where fertilization takes place. So please make sure you know it's in the fallopian tube. Then we have the ovary. It has follicles which produce ova and sex hormones. Then we have the endometrium, which is a mucous membrane lining filled with small blood vessels which assist in the implantation of the embryo. And if you're wondering why your period also hurts really badly, it's because the myometrium actually starts contracting and pulling so vigorously. It actually starts shedding the endometrium. It actually tries to get it to peel off of the myometrium, and that's also why it hurts so much. And remember that there's extreme amounts of pain over the rest of the pelvic area because all those muscles are connected via connective tissue. So there's going to be a whole lot of what's the stuff called, tendons and ligaments and stuff like that, all in that area, and they're pulling on the muscles, which is causing extreme pain. Then finally we have the cervix, and this is the neck of the uterus. Please include there that it is sphincter shaped, and only allows for sperm to go through, and also stops the baby from falling out. So when you are pregnant and your pregnancy is well on its way, there will actually be a plug. The body creates like a mucous membrane inside of the cervix that actually stops the baby from moving out due to gravity. So I'm sorry if this freaks you out, but here is a nice internal structure of a passed away woman. We can see over there that we have the fimbriae at the top left hand corner, and then we have the little ovaries over there. Yes, those things is what is going to be producing your ova. Then we have the fallopian tube on either side. We have the uterine horns left and right in the center. We have the broad ligament, which is holding the entire fallopian tubes upright. And then you can just see the bladder over there. You can't see the uterus, and also we don't want to show you the uterus because it's just a little bit lower, and then you'll see the everything about the woman. Here is the structure of the clitoris. This isn't to freak you out. It's actually part of your syllabus. I went and checked it up. So you got your vaginal opening right at the base over there, and then you have a separate hole just above that, which is your urethra. Okay, so they're two separate holes completely. Directly above that is the glans clitoris. So remember when we did the male reproductive system, I said that the glans was the head of the penis. So this is the head of the clitoris. And the word clitoris itself is actually directly translated into mini penis. Alright, so that glans clitoris has a clitoris shaft or clitoral shaft and goes to a corpus cavernosum. Oh wow, doesn't that sound exactly the same as the male spongy muscle which creates the shaft of the penis? Then we have the bulb of vestibule and the crus clitoris. Both of those are just erectile tissues which allows for the movement of the clitoris. And then we have the not the vaginal opening. Where is that? Oh, it's gone now. Anyway, that off-white, the clitoral shaft. No, not the clitoral shaft. That off-white bit over the glans clitoris, that is where the vulva are going to be found. So your labia minora and labia majora, you are going to have two sets of lips, one that will go around the outer white layer over there, and then one on the outside of that. This is the cross-section through a female, so that you can see what the female reproductive system looks like from the side. So right at the bottom there's that word vulva. That is the opening of the vaginal canal. Then we have the vagina itself. That moves up into the cervix. Once the cervix, which is a sphincter structure, that enters the uterus. Notice how it's slightly sideways. And then from there we have the uterus, which is connected by the fallopian tube to the ovary, and that holds everything in the center of the body. All right, and just so that you guys have an understanding, I've also included the rectum and the anus so you can see how close they all are. And this is also just to remind you that you should always wipe from front to back, not from back to front. So not from anus to vulva, from vulva to anus. Otherwise, you're going to get a whole bunch of infections. Please also note that the bladder is sitting in front of the uterus itself, and that's why while a child is developing inside over there, it actually starts to push on your bladder quite a lot, and you need to go to the bathroom quite often. Here's a more 3D version of all of it. You can see that we've got the vaginal canal at the base over there, the bladder on the left hand side in front of it, we've got the rectum to the far right hand side, we have the uterus, the fallopian tube, and the ovary. Please also note how close, please note where the pubic bone is on this as well. Notice how much lower it is compared to the male, and that is also to provide a whole lot of support while the child is developing inside of the mother. So let's talk about the wonderful ovaries. The female sex organs that produce ova or eggs, they're found in the lower part of the abdominal cavity, held in place by ligaments, made up of a layer of germinal epithelium with many follicles inside. So germinal epithelium, remember the word germ line or germ cells means gametes. Okay, so germinal epithelium is the epithelium which is normally cuboidal epithelium that is going to go through the process of meiosis to produce a whole bunch of ova. The germinal epithelium produces these follicles. Now, what on earth is a follicle? A follicle is literally a cell membrane that holds the egg inside of it and allows for the egg itself to develop inside, all while being protected inside of the follicle. Eventually, the follicle is going to mature, and we'll talk about, I'll show you some diagrams a little bit later, as well as when we do the menstrual cycle. They are embedded in the outer layer of the ovary and on small primary follicles. They contain an immature egg, and a girl is born with 200,000 to 400,000 primary follicles. So when you are born, you already have a maximum amount of kids that you can have. I'm not saying that you'll be able to produce, anywhere close to 200,000 kids, but that's how many eggs you are going to be able to, have throughout your entire existence. And remember, that is only from the beginning of puberty until you hit menopause. When puberty starts, primary follicle develops into a mature follicle known as a Graafian follicle. Don't worry about that word just yet. I'll teach it to you a little bit later. And the Graafian follicle forms a structure called the corpus luteum. Once egg is released, the corpus luteum produces progesterone, and then oogenesis is the development of follicles. Please note, so we've got spermatogenesis, which is the formation or growth and production of sperm, and now we have oogenesis, which is the development of follicles, and inside of them are eggs, and oogenesis takes place in the follicle to produce the ova. So here's the structure of an ovary, a little bit closer. So on the top right-hand corner, there is primordial follicles. These are the completely immature cells that you are actually born with, and then those will eventually start developing over time. Then we have primary follicles, and inside of that, you can see a developing oocyte. That oocyte, which is actually the egg, starts to be surrounded by a secondary follicle, which is actually just a primary follicle, but a bigger version of it. Finally, we have the secondary follicle, which is from the secondary follicle, we are going to have on the far left-hand side over there, a Graafian follicle, which is a mature follicle. And then we have where it pops open, and that is going to be where ovulation occurs, and then that actual Graafian follicle is now not going to be lost itself. The body is going to turn it into a corpus luteum, and that corpus luteum is going to produce progesterone until the body starts producing, the baby starts producing the progesterone, and then if that happens, then the pregnancy will continue, and if it doesn't, sometimes some women will lose the pregnancy. You can note as well that there I've included an ovarian ligament, so there is something that is holding the internal structure as well as a blood vessel to supply some nutrients. And then last of all, diagram of a longitudinal section through an ovary. We have, or please will you draw this as well, We have the follicle and different stages of development. So on the right, in the middle, at the top over there, we have an immature follicle, and then we have a developing primary follicle. On the left hand side, the third one, we have a secondary follicle. Eventually we have a mature Graafian follicle with an ovum inside. When the ovum is released, it's called ovulation, and what is left over is then turned into a corpus luteum, and that is going to produce a whole bunch of stuff. All right, so the follicles themselves secrete the female sex hormones estrogen and progesterone. Majority estrogen in the beginning, and then progesterone when it becomes a corpus luteum. So while the girl starts going through puberty, the female sex hormones are responsible for the development of female secondary characteristics, which include increased size of breasts, development of pubic hair in the armpits, and menstruation. The corpus luteum produces the hormone progesterone. All right. Just in case you're wondering, I forgot to point it out earlier in the diagrams. The hymen, which proves a girl's virginity most times, is found in the vaginal canal itself. All right, quite close to the top of the cervix. Please remember as well that the hymen is not like a solid layer of skin underneath the cervix. Otherwise, menstruation wouldn't be allowed to occur. So there are holes, if you will, like in between the hymen, which allows for menstruation or endometrium to actually move through. So what else did I want to point out to you guys quickly? That was about it. But yeah, all right. So I hope there was a whole bunch of interesting bits and pieces in there, learning about your reproductive organs, and then next we will start the menstrual cycle.